An invisible girl to the world enters a millionaire's house, and what she did with 2 children in silence will move even the coldest hearts. Chicago wasn't usually this cold at that time of year, but the wind sweeping down from Lake Michigan seemed to bring with it a harbinger of storm. Michael Richardson observed the darkening sky through the panoramic windows of his office on the 20th floor of one of the most imposing buildings on Michigan Avenue. The numbers on his laptop screen emitted a bluish glow that reflected in his brown eyes, always alert to market opportunities. "Mr. Richardson, the meeting with the investors was cancelled due to the storm forecast," informed Diane, his secretary, for the 3rd time that day. "You can go home early today." Michael nodded without taking his eyes off the screen. Home. The word echoed in his mind like an empty space. For 3 years since Amanda had suddenly left, the mansion in Winnetka had transformed into a place where he merely slept, ate, and maintained appearances. It was no longer a home. "Thank you, Diane, you can go. I'll finish some reports and leave too." While organizing his documents, Michael received a message from Maggie, his children's current nanny, the 5th in less than 6 months. Ethan was refusing to do his homework again, and Lily had another of her silent crises, shutting herself in her room and refusing any approach. Michael breathed deeply, feeling that familiar sensation of incompetence that haunted him when it came to his children. "I'm on my way," he responded curtly. The journey from the financial district to Winnetka normally took 20 minutes, but with the rain that had begun to fall, Michael would take at least twice as long. He turned on the radio just to silence the noise of his own thoughts. The announcer was reporting the worst storm in recent years, with risks of landslides in the more vulnerable areas of the Chicago metropolitan area. Michael reduced his speed as he entered the residential neighborhood where he lived. The enormous houses, protected by high walls and sophisticated security systems, seemed like impenetrable fortresses against the outside world. His Range Rover slid over the wet asphalt to the automatic gates of his residence. While waiting for them to open, he noticed something unusual at the corner of his vision. Under the side awning, where there was a small service entrance, a small figure was huddled. Initially, he thought it was a stray animal seeking shelter from the rain, but looking more carefully, he realized it was a person, a child. By instinct, his hand went to his phone to call the neighborhood security. However, something stopped him. The Range Rover slowly entered and stopped in the covered garage. Michael remained in the vehicle for a few minutes, pondering. On any other day, he would have simply ignored the situation or delegated someone to resolve it. But today, Maggie's message about the children and the weight of the silence that awaited him inside the house made him make a different decision. He exited the car, protected by an umbrella, and walked to the side of the house. The rain was falling hard now, forming a water curtain between him and the street. The figure was still there, motionless. "Hey, do you need help?" he asked, maintaining a safe distance. The figure moved slightly, revealing itself to be a girl. She didn't seem to be more than 13 years old. She was soaked, with worn clothes that clung to her thin frame. Her eyes, large and dark, stared at him with a mixture of fear and defiance. In her arms, she clutched an old notebook, with a cover partially undone by moisture. "I just wanted a dry place until the rain passes," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible under the roar of the storm. Michael hesitated. The risks passed through his mind like automatic calculations. It was what he did all day as CEO of one of the country's largest educational technology companies. Risk of robbery? Unlikely, considering the girl's size. Legal risk? Possible, but manageable. Risk of exposure? No neighbor would see him in this rain. "Come through the service entrance," he finally said, indicating a side door. "You can dry off in the laundry room." The girl didn't move immediately, as if evaluating whether the offer was safe. "No one will harm you," added Michael, realizing her fear. "You just can't stay in the rain." Slowly, she rose and followed him to the entrance. Michael opened the door and led her to a spacious and immaculately clean environment that was the mansion's laundry room. The contrast between the soaked girl and the antiseptic environment couldn't be greater. "Wait here," he said, going to fetch a clean towel from the built-in cabinet. When he returned, he found the girl in exactly the same position, as if fearing that any movement might be interpreted as an invasion. Her eyes scanned the environment, registering every detail of the laundry room, which alone seemed larger than many apartments in the city. "Here," Michael extended the towel. "What's your name?" "Rebecca," she answered, accepting the towel with perceptible hesitation. "But everyone calls me Becca." "I'm Michael," he responded, without offering his surname, a habit acquired after years of dealing with people interested only in his fortune. "Do you live nearby?" Becca lowered her gaze to the notebook in her arms, now partially dried by the towel. "I don't live anywhere fixed," she said with an honesty that disarmed Michael. Before he could question further, the laundry room door opened and Maggie appeared, interrupting the conversation. Her eyes widened at seeing the girl. "Mr. Richardson!" she exclaimed, clearly disturbed by the unexpected presence. "What's happening here?" "The girl was in the rain. I just allowed her to dry off," explained Michael, suddenly aware of how strange the situation might appear. "Could you prepare something hot for her to drink? Hot chocolate, perhaps, and prepare a snack too." Maggie pursed her lips in disapproval but nodded. "And what about the children?" "Lily has a fever and Ethan—" "I'll see them in a moment," interrupted Michael. "First, make sure this girl has something to eat." After Maggie left, an uncomfortable silence hung between Michael and Becca. He observed her as she carefully dried the pages of her notebook, which seemed to be her most precious possession. "What do you have there?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Just drawings," replied Becca, finally relaxing her shoulders a bit. "I draw what I imagine." Something in the simplicity of that answer touched Michael. How long had it been since he himself had allowed himself to imagine anything beyond market strategies and business growth? "Do you have children?" Becca suddenly asked, surprising him with her perspicacity. "Yes," replied Michael, "an 8-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl." "How do you know?" Becca gave a small smile, the first since she had entered the house. "There are toys in the garden. You can see them from the street, even with the high wall. And there are photos of them on your car key." Michael instinctively looked at the keys in his hand. Indeed, there was a small digital keychain with rotating photos of Ethan and Lily, photos from a time when they still smiled. A thunderclap made Becca startle, and for a brief moment, Michael saw beyond the facade of self-confidence she tried to maintain. She was just a frightened child, trying to appear strong in a world too big for her. "Come," he said, making a sudden decision. "You can stay in the kitchen until the rain passes. It's warmer there." As he guided her through the impeccable corridors of the mansion, Michael couldn't imagine how that simple act of compassion would forever change the course of their lives. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The kitchen of the Richardson mansion was a spacious and modern environment, with black granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and a central island that seemed to float above the marble floor. Everything there exuded opulence and coldness, as if the environment had been designed to impress, not to welcome. Becca sat timidly on one of the high stools, still clutching the notebook to her chest, while watching Maggie prepare hot chocolate with mechanical movements and suspicious glances in her direction. "You shouldn't bring strangers into the house," Maggie murmured to Michael when he returned to the kitchen after changing clothes. "Especially with the children here." "She's just a girl seeking shelter from the rain," replied Michael, aware that the situation was, at minimum, unusual for his standards. He, who lived surrounded by security protocols and social filters, had broken all the rules on impulse. "As soon as the storm passes, she'll leave." A small noise at the kitchen door interrupted the conversation. Lily was standing there in her unicorn pajamas and with feverish eyes shining with curiosity. Her light brown hair, identical to her mother's, was disheveled, and she held her faded stuffed rabbit, an inseparable companion since Amanda's disappearance. "Who are you?" Lily asked Becca directly, completely ignoring the adults in the room. Maggie rushed to try to move Lily away. "Go back to bed, dear. You're sick and need to rest." But Lily dodged with surprising agility and walked until she stood in front of Becca. The two stared at each other for a long moment, as if communicating silently. "Are you a sad angel?" Lily suddenly asked with that raw honesty that only children possess. Becca blinked, visibly surprised by the question. Then, to Michael's astonishment, a genuine smile illuminated her face. "No," she answered softly. "I'm just a normal person, "My name is Becca." "I'm Lily," said the little girl, extending her small hand. "Do you want to see my room? There's a dollhouse that nobody ever plays with me." Before Maggie or Michael could intervene, Lily had already taken Becca's hand and was pulling her out of the kitchen. Michael made a move to stop them, but something held him back. Lily's smile. How many months had passed since he had last seen his daughter smile like that? "Let them be," he said to Maggie, who seemed about to have a nervous collapse. "Keep an eye on them, but let them be." As Maggie reluctantly followed the girls, Michael remained in the kitchen trying to process what had just happened. Lily, who for months had refused to interact even with the most qualified nannies, had instantly connected with a complete stranger. A street girl at that. Ethan appeared in the kitchen minutes later, attracted by the unusual movement. Unlike his sister, he maintained a defensive posture, observing his father with cautious eyes. "There's a strange girl in Lily's room," he said as if reporting an invasion. "I know," replied Michael, indicating for his son to sit. "She was in the rain and I allowed her to come in to dry off. Her name is Becca." Ethan nodded, absorbing the information with the seriousness that had become his trademark since his mother's disappearance. At 8 years old, he already carried on his shoulders the weight of a self-imposed responsibility to protect his sister and keep Amanda's memory alive. "Lily is laughing," commented Ethan, as if he were observing an inexplicable phenomenon. "Yes, I noticed," replied Michael, observing his son attentively. "Does that bother you?" Ethan shrugged, a gesture that had become his standard response to almost everything. "She forgot Mom too quickly." The phrase hit Michael like a punch to the stomach. Is that what Ethan thought? That smiling meant forgetting. "Ethan," Michael began, choosing his words carefully, "feeling joy doesn't mean forgetting who we love. Your mother—" "Do you have a meeting early tomorrow?" interrupted Ethan, abruptly changing the subject, another tactic he had perfected to avoid emotional conversations. Michael sighed. "Yes, but I can cancel if you want me to stay home." "You don't need to," replied Ethan, getting down from the stool. "I'll go see what they're doing." Michael observed his son leave, carrying on his small shoulders a burden that no child should bear. How many times had he offered his presence, only to be dismissed? And how many times, secretly relieved, had he taken refuge in work where he knew exactly what to do? An hour passed, and the rain only increased outside. Michael, restless, decided to check what was happening in Lily's room. As he approached the half-open door, he heard something that hadn't echoed in that house for a long time. Laughter. Not just from Lily, but from Ethan, too. He peeked through the crack and saw a scene that seemed to belong to another reality. Lily, Ethan, and Becca were sitting on the fluffy carpet, surrounded by sheets from Becca's notebook. She was drawing something while narrating a story, gesturing with her free hands, making different voices for each character. Lily was curled up beside her like a kitten, and Ethan, although maintaining some distance, had his eyes fixed on the drawings, completely absorbed. And then the brave boy faced the dragon not with a sword, but with a storybook, narrated Becca, drawing with quick and precise strokes. Because sometimes the greatest battles aren't won with strength, but with imagination. "I want to be brave like that," said Lily, her eyes shining with admiration. "You already are," replied Becca naturally. "Courage isn't not being afraid. It's doing what needs to be done even while being afraid." Michael backed away silently, feeling like an intruder in that moment of intimacy. What was happening? How had that unknown girl managed in a few hours what months of expensive therapies and sophisticated toys hadn't achieved? The night advanced, and the storm only worsened. News on Michael's cell phone reported flooding in various parts of the city, with forecasts that the rain would continue until the following morning. He found Maggie in the living room, visibly disturbed. "Mr. Richardson, we need to talk," she said, nervously adjusting the collar of her blouse. "This situation is completely irregular. We don't know anything about this girl, where she came from, if she has family, if she has diseases." "I know, Maggie," interrupted Michael, rubbing his temples. "But I can't send her away in this storm." "Then what do you suggest?" asked Maggie, clearly uncomfortable. "She can spend the night in the guest room," decided Michael. "Tomorrow, when the rain stops, we'll resolve this." Maggie seemed about to protest but contained herself. "As you wish, sir. Should I call the children for dinner?" "Yes, please." Dinner that night was different from any other in the last 3 years. The large dining room table, normally silent except for the clinking of cutlery, was now filled with Lily's voice, who talked non-stop about Becca's drawings. Ethan, although more reserved, occasionally entered the conversation, especially when the subject involved dragons and adventures. Becca, for her part, ate politely, but with the avidity of someone who doesn't know when they will have their next meal. "You draw very well," commented Michael, observing how the girl had carefully folded the napkin on her lap, a gesture that denoted previous education. "Did you have lessons?" "No, sir," replied Becca, suddenly shy under his direct gaze. "I taught myself, copying figures from books and magazines I found. She drew our family," exclaimed Lily, waving a paper. "Look, Daddy." Michael took the drawing and felt a lump in his throat. Becca had portrayed not only Ethan and Lily, but also a man who was clearly him, all sitting at the table with happy expressions. There was even a dog lying at their feet, an invented detail since they didn't have pets. "Sorry if it's not good," said Becca, misinterpreting Michael's silence. "I wasn't sure how to draw you happy, so I imagined." The rawness of that phrase hit Michael deeply. Is that how they appeared in the eyes of a stranger? A family incapable of being happy, to the point that it was necessary to imagine what it would be like. "It's perfect," he finally replied, returning the drawing. "You have a great talent." After dinner, Maggie led Becca to the guest room, but not before giving Michael a significant look. It was evident that the nanny completely disapproved of the situation, but he had already made his decision. Tomorrow would be another day, and they would resolve what to do with the mysterious girl who had brought a breath of life to the silent mansion in Winnetka. The following morning brought a clear sky and birdsong, as if the previous night's storm had been nothing more than a distant nightmare. Michael woke earlier than usual, restless with the unusual situation in which he found himself. There was a stranger sleeping in his house, a girl who apparently lived on the streets of Chicago, and about whom he knew nothing except her name. He dressed quickly and went downstairs, expecting to be the first to wake up. To his surprise, he found Becca in the kitchen, preparing what appeared to be pancake batter. The girl had rolled up the sleeves of the oversized t-shirt that Maggie had lent her to sleep in, and had tied her disheveled hair in an improvised bun. Upon noticing Michael's presence, she froze, as if she had been caught committing a crime. "I'm sorry," she said hastily. "I just wanted to thank you for the hospitality. I promise to clean everything before I leave." Michael observed the impeccably organized counter. Even the eggshells were perfectly aligned at the edge of the sink. "You don't need to apologize," he replied, walking to the coffee maker. "But you also didn't need to do this." "I like cooking," confessed Becca, returning to stirring the batter with a wooden spoon. "It calms me. I learned from my grandmother before she got sick." It was the first personal information that Becca shared voluntarily, and Michael didn't let the opportunity pass. "Your grandmother took care of you?" Becca nodded, her eyes fixed on the batter. "She and my mom. We lived together in Evanston. But after Grandma got sick, everything became more difficult." "And your mom?" asked Michael, trying to sound casual while preparing his coffee. A shadow crossed Becca's face. "She disappeared almost a year ago. One day she left for work and didn't return. The neighbor said she probably found another man and ran away, but I know that's not true. My mom would never abandon me by choice." The conviction in the girl's voice was palpable, and Michael felt a pang of compassion. He knew well the power of denial in the face of an irreparable loss. "And after your mom disappeared, what happened?" "Child Protective Services came," replied Becca, pouring a portion of batter into the hot skillet. "They took my younger brothers to a shelter in Evanston. I was supposed to go too, but I ran away. I was already 13 and knew that nobody adopts older children. I preferred to fend for myself." Michael swallowed hard. 13 years old. She was still practically a child, alone on the streets of a big city like Chicago. "And how have you been managing?" he asked, unable to disguise the concern in his voice. Becca shrugged, flipping the pancake with skill. "I do odd jobs, you know. I hand out flyers, help at fairs. Sometimes I make drawings for tourists in Millennium Park. I sleep where I can, in parks, under awnings. In Grant Park, there's a man who sells tapioca and always gives me the day's leftovers. It's not so bad, not so bad." The phrase echoed in Michael's mind like an accusation. That girl without a roof, without protection, without certainty about her next meal, considered her situation not so bad. And he, with all the resources in the world, couldn't guarantee the basics for his own children. Happiness. "Daddy!" Lily's voice broke his thoughts. She came running into the kitchen, her eyes shining with excitement. "Becca is still here. Good morning, Princess," smiled Becca, placing a pancake on a plate. "Want to try? It's my grandma's secret recipe." Lily nodded enthusiastically and climbed onto one of the stools at the central island. To Michael's surprise, she ate with appetite, something rare in recent months. "It's delicious. Daddy, you have to try." Before Michael could respond, Ethan appeared at the kitchen door, still in his pajamas, hair disheveled. His eyes went straight to Becca, as if verifying that the girl was indeed still there. "Good morning." "Sleepyhead," greeted Becca naturally, as if she had been part of the family's morning routine for years. "There's a hot pancake for you, too." Ethan didn't respond, but approached and sat next to his sister. He accepted the plate Becca offered him, and after a brief hesitation, tried a piece. His eyes widened slightly. "It's good," he murmured, a rare compliment coming from him. Maggie appeared next, and her face contracted at seeing the domestic scene unfolding. Michael could practically hear the nanny's thoughts, a stranger taking over the kitchen, interacting with the children as if she had the right to be there. "Mr. Richardson, may I speak with you in private?" asked Maggie, her voice tense. Michael followed her to the hallway, already anticipating what was to come. "This cannot continue," said Maggie in an urgent whisper. "You are allowing a minor in a completely irregular situation to live with your children. If something happens, the responsibility will be yours." "I am aware of that, Maggie," replied Michael, keeping his voice low. "But look at the children. When was the last time you saw Lily eat with such enthusiasm? Or Ethan voluntarily interact with someone?" Maggie pressed her lips into a thin line. "That doesn't change the legal facts. You could be accused of negligence or worse. As your lawyer would say, you are taking an unnecessary risk." "I understand your concern," said Michael, running his hand through his hair. "Give me until the end of the day. I'll resolve this situation." But how to resolve it? The question tormented him as he returned to the kitchen. The scene he found there didn't help clear his thoughts. Becca was serving more pancakes to the children, telling some story that made them laugh. There was a familiarity in that picture, a sense of normality that the house hadn't experienced since Amanda had left. After breakfast, while the children were preparing for the day's activities, swimming lessons for Ethan and ballet for Lily, Michael found Becca tidying the guest room. "You don't need to do that," he said. Standing at the door, Becca carefully folded the sheet. "I like to leave everything in order. My mum always said that we should leave places better than we found them. Your mum seems to have been a good person." "She was," replied Becca, a shadow of sadness crossing her young face. "She worked as a house cleaner in family homes here in Winnetka, you know. Sometimes she brought me to help. That's how I learned to organize things the way rich people like." Becca's frankness was disconcerting. There was no bitterness in her voice, just a statement of facts, like observing that the sky is blue or that water is wet. "Becca," began Michael, sitting on the edge of the bed, "we need to talk about what happens now." The girl immediately became alert, her shoulders stiffening. "I'm already leaving, don't worry. I just wanted to say goodbye to the children." "It's not that," Michael hastened to say. "It's that your situation worries me. You're very young to be on the streets." Becca looked at him with a maturity beyond her years. "Many people are too young for what life gives them, Mr. Richardson. We adapt." "And your brothers? Do you know exactly where they are?" "At the New Horizons shelter in Evanston," replied Becca promptly. "I go there sometimes, watching from a distance. Peter is 6 now, and Thomas is about to turn 5. They seem okay, at least they have food and a roof. But I don't know if they're together or separated. That worries me." "And you never thought about going back to be with them?" Becca sat down too, hugging the sketchbook that she never abandoned. "I thought about it many times, but then I remember the rules, the punishments, how they treat those who don't obey. And I'm afraid they'll separate us for good, that they'll send each of us to a different place. At least this way I stay nearby, you know. One day when I'm older, I'll go get my brothers and we'll be together again." Michael felt a lump in his throat. This girl carried a greater responsibility than many adults he knew. And unlike him, she didn't run from it. "And in the meantime, you live on the streets. It's just for a while. replied Becca with a hope that broke Michael's heart. "When I turn 18, I'll be able to rent a small place, get a steady job, maybe even go back to school. Then I can go get my brothers. 5 years. 5 years living in parks under awnings, depending on the kindness of strangers." The idea was unbearable. "What if," Michael began, surprised by the words coming out of his mouth, "what if you stayed here for a few more days? Until we think of a better solution?" Becca's eyes widened. "Here, in your house?" "Yes, the children liked you, and you clearly know how to manage. We could establish some rules, of course. And it would be temporary, until we find a more suitable situation." Becca seemed suspicious, as if she were waiting for him to reveal the catch at any moment. "Why? Why would you do this for me?" The question caught Michael off guard. Why, indeed? He barely knew this girl. He had no obligation to her whatsoever. Yet something about her had touched a part of his being that had been dormant for a long time. "Because you brought a bit of life back to this house," he answered honestly. "And because no one should be alone at 13. Becca lowered her gaze to her small, calloused hands, hands that had already worked more than they should have. "And the nanny? She won't like it." "Leave Maggie to me," replied Michael, standing up. "So what do you say? Do you accept staying a few more days?" After a long moment of silence, Becca slowly nodded. "I accept, but I want to help. I can cook, clean, take care of the garden, anything. You don't need to do that. We already have employees for those tasks." "Yes, I do," insisted Becca, her firm gaze meeting his. "I don't accept charity. If I'm going to stay, I want to be useful." Michael recognized in those words the same pride that had driven him since he was young. He understood that for Becca, working wasn't just a form of repayment, but of maintaining her dignity. "All right," he finally agreed. "We'll see what you can do. But your main task will be to interact with Ethan and Lily. They really seem to like you." A genuine smile illuminated Becca's face, completely transforming her features. For a moment, Michael glimpsed the child she should have been, free from premature worries and responsibilities. "Thank you, Mr. Richardson. I promise you won't regret it." As he left the room, Michael wasn't sure if he was making the right decision. He only knew that, for the first time in a long time, he was following not the cold logic of business, but something deeper and more instinctive, the voice of his heart. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The following days brought a subtle but noticeable transformation to the Richardson mansion. Small details began to change. The aroma of homemade bread in the morning, laughter echoing through the corridors, colorful drawings scattered across the refrigerator. Becca's presence, initially strange, quickly became part of the daily fabric of that home. Each meal transformed into a moment for stories and laughter. The evenings were filled with drawing sessions or board games that Michael didn't even remember he owned. Maggie, however, maintained a constant state of vigilance. Her suspicious glances followed Becca through the mansion, as if expecting to catch her stealing some valuable object or negatively influencing the children. After 3 days, her patience ran out. She waited until the children were occupied with their online lessons to confront Michael in his office. "This has gone beyond limits," she declared, placing a thick law book on the table. "You are violating at least 5 articles of the Child Protection Act. This girl should be under state custody, not in your house without any legal supervision." Michael raised his eyes from the documents he was analyzing. "She is under my supervision, Maggie." "You are not her legal guardian," exclaimed the nanny, her normally controlled tone rising an octave. "If something happens, if she gets hurt, if she hurts one of the children—" "She wouldn't do that," interrupted Michael, surprising himself with his own conviction. "You don't know that. You don't know anything about her beyond what she herself has told you. What if it's all lies? What if she ran away from home because she's violent? What if she has contagious diseases?" "Enough." Michael's voice acquired that cold tone that made executives tremble in board meetings. "Becca is not a threat, and you know it. What really bothers you, Maggie? The fact that a street girl is under the same roof as you, or the fact that she managed in a few days what you couldn't achieve in months, making my children smile again?" Maggie paled as if she had been slapped. "That's unfair. I have dedicated myself to these children as a professional," completed Michael, "and Becca treats them as a friend, a sister. There's a fundamental difference there." Well, Maggie straightened her posture, regaining her composure. If you insist on this madness, I cannot continue working here. I have my reputation and professional license to protect." Michael hadn't expected this, but he wasn't shaken either. "I'm sorry to hear that. You've been a good professional, Maggie. I'll prepare your letter of recommendation and payment for the entire month, plus severance pay." The nanny seemed to expect a different reaction, a request for her to reconsider. When she realized this wouldn't come, she took the book and walked to the door. Before leaving, however, she turned with a somber expression. "I hope you know what you're doing, Mr. Richardson. This girl doesn't belong in this world. Sooner or later, reality will come to collect its price." After Maggie's departure, Michael remained in his office, reflecting. Was he really making a mistake? His life had always been guided by rational, calculated, predictable decisions. This was the first time in years that he was acting on instinct, and it frightened him. Not because of Becca's presence itself, but because of what she represented. A rupture with the state of emotional dormancy he had been in since Amanda's departure. A light noise at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Becca carrying a cup of tea. "Chamomile," she said, placing the cup on the desk. "My grandma used to say it calms the nerves." "I heard the discussion." "I'm sorry about that," replied Michael, accepting the drink. "You weren't supposed to hear that." Becca shrugged her shoulders. "I've heard worse things. The nanny is right, you know. We shouldn't be in the same house. I am from another world." "That's nonsense," replied Michael, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "There aren't different worlds, Becca, just circumstances." "Circumstances that make a big difference," she retorted with a wisdom beyond her years. "You never had to sleep on a park bench in the cold, or rummage through trash to find food, and you never will need to." Michael felt the weight of those words. It was true. Even in the most difficult phases of his life, he had never known true material deprivation. "That doesn't mean we should live in separate worlds," he insisted. "Or that you can't be here." Becca sat in the chair across from him, her feet barely touching the floor. "Can I ask you something?" Of course. Why are you really letting me stay?" The truth. The question caught Michael off guard. For a moment he considered giving a polite answer, a half-truth. But something in Becca's direct gaze demanded honesty. "Because since you arrived, my house has become a home again," he finally answered. "Because my children are returning to being children. And perhaps," he added after a pause, "because you remind me that there's more to life than spreadsheets and board meetings." Becca absorbed the words in silence, her young face assuming a serious expression. "And if I bring problems?" The nanny mentioned child protective services. "They might come for me." "Leave that to me," replied Michael, although he had no idea how he would face such a situation. "For now, let's just enjoy the day. Tomorrow is Sunday. What do you think about taking the children to the park?" Becca's face lit up, but soon a shadow of concern returned. "What if someone recognizes me? There are social workers who look for me in the park sometimes." Michael hadn't thought of that. "Then we'll choose a quieter place. Maybe Lincoln Park? It's big enough for us to get lost in the crowd." The smile returned to Becca's face. "That would be amazing. Ethan and Lily will love it." After Becca left, Michael remained seated, contemplating the cup of tea. What madness was he living? In a week, his meticulously controlled routine had been turned upside down by a street girl, and surprisingly, he was enjoying it. Sunday dawned with an intensely blue sky, typical of Chicago in the drier months. Michael woke to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen, an awakening that still seemed strange to him, but pleasant. He found Becca, Ethan, and Lily preparing pancakes, all three covered in flour. Lily, seeing him, ran in his direction. "Daddy, we made breakfast for you." "Becca is teaching me to cook like her grandma." Michael picked her up, not caring about the flour that dirtied his pajamas. "Hey, it smells delicious, Princess." Ethan, more reserved, just waved from the counter where he was sitting, but there was a different gleam in his eyes, a lightness that hadn't been seen for a long time. "Good morning, Mr. Richardson," greeted Becca, flipping a pancake with expertise. "I hope you don't mind the mess. I promised to clean everything afterward." "I don't mind at all," he replied sincerely. "It was just flour after all." How could something so trivial compare to the joy that filled the kitchen? After breakfast, everyone prepared for the outing. Michael noticed that Becca was wearing the same worn clothes she had arrived in, now clean but visibly small for her. He made a mental note to resolve this as soon as possible. Lincoln Park, with its vast green area at the edge of Lake Michigan, was the perfect place for a Sunday family outing. Michael couldn't remember the last time he had visited the park, probably years ago when Amanda was still alive, and the family truly functioned as a unit. "Look, Daddy, a hawk!" exclaimed Lily, pointing to the trees. "Becca said she can draw one just like it." "I can try," smiled Becca, already opening her sketchbook. "But he needs to stay still longer." Michael observed the two running towards the bird, with Ethan following at a cautious distance, but interested. He sat on a nearby bench, allowing himself to relax for the first time in how long? Years, probably. It was then that he noticed the middle-aged couple observing them from a nearby bench. The woman especially seemed fixated on Becca, with an expression that mixed curiosity and suspicion. Michael felt a pang of apprehension. "Mr. Richardson?" "Michael Richardson?" A female voice interrupted his thoughts. Michael turned and found an elegant woman approaching with a polite smile. It took a few seconds to recognize her. Regina Mercer, wife of one of the members of his company's board, and a prominent figure in the Chicago elite social circle. "Regina, what a surprise," he greeted, standing out of politeness. "Likewise," she replied, her astute eyes evaluating the scene before her. "I didn't know you frequented the park on Sundays. I always thought you were too busy with business." There was a slight note of disapproval in her voice, as if being there with the children was somehow inferior to participating in business meetings on the weekend. "I'm rediscovering the value of family time," replied Michael, maintaining a casual tone. Regina's gaze settled on the children, who were now drawing sitting on the grass with Becca in the middle. "I didn't know you had 3 children." "I thought there were only 2. Michael's heart raced. "Ethan and Lily are my children. The other girl is Daddy." Lily's voice momentarily saved him. She was running in his direction, holding a drawing. "Look what Becca did." "It's our family." Regina leaned in to see the drawing that Lily was proudly displaying. 5 smiling figures: Michael, Ethan, Lily, Becca, and an imaginary dog, all holding hands under a radiant sun. "How lovely." "Dear," commented Regina, her smile not reaching her eyes, "and who is Becca exactly?" Lily looked at her father, suddenly uncertain about what to answer. "Becca is a family friend who is spending a few days with us," explained Michael, keeping his voice firm. "I see," replied Regina, although her tone suggested otherwise. "Well, I don't want to interrupt your Sunday. It was a pleasure seeing you, Michael. Send my regards to Edward. The next board meeting promises to be too interesting." After Regina walked away, Michael felt a growing uneasiness. The apparently casual encounter had an air of foreboding. Regina Mercer was known for her involvement in social works, but also for her sharp tongue and influential connections. "Is everything okay, Daddy?" asked Lily, pulling his hand. "You look worried." Michael forced a smile. "Everything's great, Princess. How about some ice cream before we head back home?" While the children celebrated the idea, Michael exchanged a look with Becca. There was understanding in her eyes, a keen perception that went beyond her 13 years. She too had sensed the change in the air, the first sign that the tranquility of the past few days might be about to end. And she was right. The phone call came the next morning, when Michael had barely arrived at the office. His secretary entered with a worried expression. "Mr. Richardson, there's a representative from Child Protective Services on the line. She says she needs to speak urgently about a minor under your care." Michael felt his blood freeze in his veins. His first reaction was panic, but years of difficult negotiations had taught him to maintain his composure, even in the most tense situations. "Put the call through," he said to his secretary, adjusting his tie in an automatic gesture. The voice on the other end of the line was formal and direct. Without beating around the bush, "Mr. Michael Richardson? This is Dr. Isabella Santos, Child Welfare Officer for the North Region. We received a report about a minor in an irregular situation residing on your property. I would like to schedule a visit to verify the situation." Michael breathed deeply before responding. "May I ask what is the exact nature of this report, Dr. Santos?" "The report indicates that you are sheltering an adolescent without family ties and without any legal documentation authorizing such a situation. This constitutes a potential risk to the minor and a possible violation of the Child Protection Act. We need to investigate urgently." Regina Mercer. It had to be her. The speed with which the report had been made only confirmed his suspicions. "I understand your concern," replied Michael, keeping his voice calm. "When would this visit be?" "This afternoon, if possible. The sooner we resolve this, the better for everyone, especially for the minor in question. I'll be home at 3 p.m., my address. We already have that information. Mr. Richardson, we'll see you at 3 p.m. The call ended abruptly, leaving Michael with a buzzing in his ears and a sense of urgency he hadn't experienced since the first days after Amanda's departure. Immediately, he called his personal lawyer, Edward Valentine, one of the few he considered a real friend as well as an advisor. "Ed, I need you at my house this afternoon." "It's urgent," he said as soon as the lawyer answered. "What happened?" asked Edward, perceiving the tension in his friend's voice. Michael quickly explained the situation with Becca, from the encounter in the storm to the report to Child Protective Services. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Edward responded. "You are aware that you sheltered a minor without any legal authorization, right?" "This is extremely complicated, Michael." "I know, but you should have seen, Ed. This girl transformed my house. Ethan and Lily are different. They're smiling again, playing. And Becca, she can't go back to the streets. I can't allow that." "What exactly do you intend to do?" asked Edward cautiously. "I don't know yet. Maybe request temporary guardianship." "Is that possible?" Another silence, longer this time. "Michael, you're talking about an extremely complex process. Even being who you are, with your resources and influence, it's not something simple. There are procedures, investigations, interviews with social workers. How long would it take? Months, in the best scenario. And with no guarantee of success. You're a single man, a workaholic with no history of involvement in social causes. Frankly, these aren't credentials that impress the juvenile court. But my children adore her, Ed, and she adores them too. I can't simply let her go, not after seeing what she means to this family." "Family," repeated Edward thoughtfully. "Is that what this is about deep down? Are you trying to rebuild what you lost with Amanda?" The question hit Michael like a punch. Was that it? Was he using Becca as a substitute for the void that Amanda had left? No, it wasn't that simple. "It's not that," he responded firmly. "It's more complex. Becca needs us as much as we need her. She brought life back to my house, yes, but that's not the only reason I want to help her. It's because she deserves a chance, Ed. A real chance." "I see," said Edward after a moment. "I'll be there at 2:30 p.m. We'll think of a strategy before the council arrives." After hanging up, Michael cancelled all the day's meetings and drove home, his mind racing with possibilities and fears. How would he explain the situation to Becca and to the children? How would they react if Becca were taken away? Upon arriving home, he found an unusual silence. Since Becca's arrival, the mansion was rarely quiet at this time of day. He followed the low sound of voices to the game room, where he found a scene that clutched at his heart. Becca was sitting on the floor with Ethan and Lily, the three surrounded by drawings and colored papers. They were making what appeared to be a large storybook, with vibrant illustrations and text carefully handwritten. "Daddy," exclaimed Lily upon seeing him, "we're making a book." "Becca is writing the story, and Ethan and I are coloring the drawings. It's about a boy and a girl who find a lost fairy in the forest," explained Ethan, surprisingly communicative. "And they help her return home." Michael felt a lump in his throat. The metaphor was so transparent it hurt. "It's beautiful," he managed to say, approaching to get a better look. The illustrations were impressive for a 13-year-old girl, detailed, expressive, almost professional. "You all have a lot of talent." Becca raised her eyes to him, and Michael immediately realized that she knew. Somehow she had sensed that something was wrong. "Children," he said, sitting on the nearby sofa, "can you give me a minute alone with Becca? I need to talk to her about something important." Lily pouted, but Ethan, always more perceptive, took his sister by the hand. "Let's get more colored pencils from my room," he said, leading her out of the room. When they were alone, Becca began gathering the scattered drawings, her methodical movements betraying her nervousness. "They're coming for me, aren't they?" she asked without raising her eyes. "Child Protective Services." Michael saw no point in lying. "Yes, someone made a report. They'll be here at 3 p.m. to check on your situation." Becca nodded as if she had already expected this. "I knew it wouldn't last." Good things never last for people like me. Don't say that, Michael approached, sitting on the floor beside her. I'm trying to find a solution. What solution? They'll take me back to the shelter, or worse, to some stricter institution since I ran away. That's how it works. Not necessarily, insisted Michael, although Edward's words about the difficulties of the process echoed in his mind. My lawyer will be here soon. We'll talk with Child Protective Services, explain the situation. Becca finally looked at him, her dark eyes full of a sad wisdom. Mr. Richardson, you are rich, powerful, and important. I am nobody, a street girl without documents, without a present family. Who do you think the system will favor? Don't delude yourself. The rawness of that observation hit Michael deeply. She was right, and they both knew it. Then I'll change the system, he declared, surprising himself with the determination in his voice. I have resources, contacts, influence. If it's necessary to move mountains to keep you here safe, with a real chance at a future, then that's what I'll do. Becca observed him for a long moment, as if evaluating the sincerity of his words. Finally, a small smile appeared on her lips. Do you really believe you can do that? I'll try with all my strength, promised Michael. But Becca, I need to know. Do you want to stay here with us? Would it be something you would freely choose? The question seemed to surprise her. Are you asking me if I prefer a mansion with hot food, soft beds, and people who seem to like me to sleeping in parks and eating leftovers? Seriously? It's not just that, insisted Michael. I'm asking if you feel at home here, if you can see us as your family in some way. Becca lowered her gaze to the scattered drawings, colorful images of smiling children, protective adults, welcoming homes. Dreams transferred to paper. I never thought I could belong in a place like this, she confessed in a low voice. I thought my destiny was to struggle and survive until I could rescue my brothers. But these days here? Her voice faltered for a moment. It's been like living inside one of my drawings. Too real to be true, too good to last. It can last, insisted Michael. If you want. If we can fight for it together. Becca stared at him intensely, as if searching for any sign of falsehood in his words. Why? She finally asked. Why would you do this for me? The truth. The question echoed the one she had asked days ago, but this time Michael knew exactly the answer. Because you saved my family. Becca, before you arrived, this house was just a mausoleum of memories. I was lost in my grief, unable to really see my own children, to connect with them. You with your strength, your resilience, and mainly, with your capacity to love despite everything you've been through. You showed us the way back to life. If that doesn't deserve gratitude and commitment, I don't know what does. Becca's eyes filled with tears, but she contained them with the dignity of someone who had learned too early to hide her own vulnerability. Then let's fight, she said simply. Edward's arrival preceded that of Child Protective Services by exactly 30 minutes, as promised. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with graying hair and an elegant bearing, seemed concerned but determined. After a quick conversation with Michael and a formal introduction to Becca, he outlined a preliminary plan. I won't lie, the situation is complicated, explained Edward as he reviewed some documents. The standard procedure would be to take Becca to the shelter immediately while the case is analyzed. But we have some cards up our sleeve. Which ones? Asked Michael anxiously. First, your status and resources. Second, the evident well-being that Becca demonstrates here. Third, the positive impact she's having on Ethan and Lily, which can be considered relevant to the interest of the minors involved. We'll argue that an abrupt separation would be harmful to all the children. And will that be enough? Questioned Becca, her skeptical tone revealing that she had seen promises broken before. Edward looked at her with respect, without condescension. Honestly, I don't know. But it's a start. The important thing is to buy time. If we can prevent you from being taken today, we'll have a chance to initiate a formal process of temporary guardianship. The doorbell rang, making all three startle. They're here, murmured Michael, feeling his heart race. Becca, go stay with the children for now. We'll call you when necessary. Becca nodded and left quickly, but not before casting a last look at Michael, a mixture of hope and resignation that hit him deeply. Dr. Isabella Santos was a black woman of medium stature, with short hair and a serious expression. She was accompanied by a younger man, who introduced himself as a social worker. Michael received them in the main living room, with Edward at his side. "Mr. Richardson," began Dr. Isabella after the formal introductions, "we are here to investigate the report about a minor in an irregular situation. According to our preliminary records, this is the adolescent Rebecca Silver, 13 years old, registered as missing from the New Horizons shelter approximately 10 months ago. Is that correct?" Michael looked at Edward, who nodded slightly. "Yes, Rebecca is here. I found her during a storm, seeking shelter on my property. Upon realizing her vulnerable situation and the positive impact she had on my children, who are in the process of grieving for their mother, I allowed her to stay temporarily." "Temporarily for how long exactly?" asked the social worker, consulting a clipboard. "A week," replied Michael honestly. "A week," repeated Dr. Isabella, raising an eyebrow. "And during this period, you didn't consider it necessary to inform the competent authorities? It didn't cross your mind that there might be a family looking for this girl? Or that keeping a minor without legal authorization constitutes, at minimum, a serious irregularity?" Edward intervened before Michael could respond. "My client was just evaluating the appropriate legal measures when he received your visit. We would like to discuss the possibility of initiating a temporary guardianship process." Dr. Isabella and the social worker exchanged glances. "Mr. Richardson," she continued, ignoring Edward's comment, "I need to see the minor immediately and speak with her alone. Afterward, we'll decide the next steps." Michael felt a tightness in his chest. This was the moment he feared, handing Becca over to be interrogated by strangers, knowing that her answers could determine her fate. "Becca is with my children at the moment," he explained. "I can call her, but I'd like to clarify that she is here of her own free will and has been a fundamental support for my family during a difficult time." "That's touching, Mr. Richardson," replied Dr. Isabella with a tone that suggested the opposite, "but it doesn't alter the legal facts. Please call the minor." As Michael left to fetch Becca, he felt as if he were walking toward a precipice. The next few hours could forever change the course of several lives, and for the first time in many years, the outcome was completely beyond his control. The conversation between Becca and the child welfare officer lasted almost an hour. For Michael, who anxiously waited in the office with Edward, each minute seemed like an eternity. Ethan and Lily had been taken to the garden by Marina, the housekeeper, who tried to distract them with games and snacks, protecting them from the tension that hung over the house. "How do you think it's going?" Michael asked for the third time, unable to contain his anxiety. Edward sighed. "Hard to say. Isabella Santos has a reputation for being fair but rigorous, and legally our position is fragile. I'm one of the most influential men in this city," murmured Michael, running his hand through his hair. "How can I feel so powerless?" "Because now you're dealing with something that can't be solved with money or power," replied Edward gently. "You're dealing with lives, with emotions, with the child protection system. It's different territory." The door finally opened and Dr. Santos entered the office alone. Her expression was unreadable. "Where's Becca?" Michael asked immediately. "I asked her to wait in the library." "We need to talk, Mr. Richardson." Michael and Edward exchanged tense glances as the officer sat in the opposite chair. "I spoke extensively with Rebecca," she began, adjusting her glasses. "She's a remarkable young woman, articulate, mature beyond her years, with an impressive capacity for resilience. She told me about her escape from the shelter, about how she has survived on the streets, about her younger brothers who are still under state custody, and about how happy she has been here," added Michael, trying to contain the anxiety in his voice. "Yes, she mentioned that too," agreed Dr. Santos. "In fact, I've never seen an adolescent in an irregular situation defend so vigorously her desire to remain in a temporary home. She spoke a lot about your children, Mr. Richardson, about how Ethan is slowly opening up, about how Lily smiles more, about the drawings and stories they create together." A ray of hope emerged in Michael's chest. "Then you understand why we can't simply separate the children now." "What I understand," replied Dr. Santos firmly, "is that we have a complex situation that needs to be resolved within legal parameters. Rebecca is a minor without a legal guardian. Her brothers are under state custody. There is an ongoing process to locate the mother, though, frankly, after so much time without contact, the prospects aren't encouraging." Edward leaned forward. "We are proposing to immediately initiate a temporary guardianship process," My client has all the necessary resources to ensure Rebecca's well-being, including adequate housing, access to quality education, medical assistance. Material resources aren't the only requirement. Dr. Valentine, interrupted Dr. Santos. We also evaluate emotional stability, time availability, family history, motivations of the applicant. Mr. Richardson is a single man, extremely busy, who recently lost his wife and has 2 young children to raise. It's not exactly the ideal profile to assume guardianship of a vulnerable adolescent. The words fell like stones upon Michael. It was exactly what he feared hearing. I'm not saying it's impossible, continued Dr. Santos, her voice softening a bit, just that it would be a long, detailed process with no guarantees of success. How long? Asked Michael. Months at minimum. And during this period, the standard procedure would be for Rebecca to return to the shelter or be placed with a temporary foster family. No, Michael's voice came out louder than intended. Forgive me, but I cannot accept that. Can't there be an intermediate solution, some temporary authorization while the process proceeds? Dr. Santos adjusted her glasses again, a habit that seemed to indicate she was carefully considering her next words. There are possibilities. They aren't conventional. But given the peculiar circumstances of this case, we can consider alternatives. We're open to any suggestion. Edward quickly intervened. Rebecca mentioned that her brothers are at the New Horizons shelter, continued the officer. Peter and Thomas, if I'm not mistaken. She showed great concern for their well-being and expressed the desire to one day reunite the family. Michael nodded, remembering how Becca talked about her brothers, with a mixture of longing and determination that was moving. There is a program called Extended Foster Family, explained Dr. Santos. It's designed for specific cases where there are groups of siblings who are separated or families in temporary situations of fragility. Normally it's applied to close relatives who assume temporary guardianship, but there are precedents for application to non-relatives in exceptional circumstances. And how does it work? Asked Michael, feeling hope reborn. The applicant undergoes a rigorous psychosocial evaluation and, if approved, receives authorization to temporarily shelter the minor, while a more complete process of guardianship or adoption proceeds. The difference is that the child or adolescent doesn't need to return to the system during this period. Edward seemed intrigued. And what would be the requirements for this program? Psychological evaluation of the applicant and all family members, regular home visits by social workers, proof of means to adequately support the minor, participation in preparation courses for foster families. She paused. And in Rebecca's specific case, I would recommend a commitment to facilitate regular contact with her brothers. Michael felt his heart race. There was a chance, after all. Would this be possible? Allowing Becca to maintain contact with her brothers? More than possible, it would be ideal, replied Dr. Santos, and for the first time a slight smile appeared on her face. In fact, Mr. Richardson, if you are truly committed to Rebecca's well-being, perhaps you should consider an even more comprehensive solution. What do you mean? Asked Michael, confused. Peter is 6 years old and Thomas is about to turn 5, explained the officer. They are together in the same shelter, but the chances of them being adopted together diminish with each passing year. Rebecca ran away from the system mainly out of fear of being permanently separated from them. Michael felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Are you suggesting that I take in all 3 siblings? Edward seemed equally surprised by the proposal. I am suggesting that you consider all possibilities, replied Dr. Santos calmly. Separating siblings is always the last option in the protection system. If you truly wish to make a difference in Rebecca's life, ensuring that she remains connected to her brothers would be the most significant step. A profound silence fell over the office as Michael absorbed that idea. 3 children, 3 lives to guide, protect, love. Added to Ethan and Lily, that would be 5 children under his roof. The idea was frightening, almost absurd, and at the same time strangely right. May I meet them? He finally asked. Becca's brothers. That could be arranged, replied Dr. Santos, studying him with renewed interest, but I want to make it clear that I'm not pressuring for a decision now. It's something that needs to be considered very carefully, discussed with your children, evaluated in all aspects. I understand, said Michael, feeling the magnitude of the situation. "And what about Becca? Can she stay for now?" The officer seemed to be waging an internal battle. "Technically, I should take her today," she admitted. "But given the unusual circumstances and the evident emotional benefit for all children involved, I can authorize a provisional stay of 30 days while we initiate the formal evaluation process for the foster family program." Michael could hardly believe what he was hearing. "That would be extraordinary, Dr. Santos. I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet, Mr. Richardson," she warned, standing up. "The next few months will be intense. Evaluations, interviews, surprise visits, extensive documentation, and the result isn't guaranteed. But if you're truly committed to this journey, my department will do its best to facilitate the process, always keeping the best interest of the children as the priority." After Dr. Santos and her assistant left, Michael remained in the office for a few minutes, trying to process everything that had happened. The idea of taking in not just Becca but also her younger brothers was both terrifying and exciting. "Are you okay?" asked Edward, observing him with concern. "I'm assimilating," replied Michael honestly. 5 children, Ed, it would be complete madness." "It would be," agreed the lawyer. "But maybe it's exactly what you need. A madness that makes sense, that fills the void that Amanda left. Not as a replacement, but as a new chapter." Michael nodded slowly. "I need to talk to Becca, and with Ethan and Lily too. I can't make a decision like this without including them." "Naturally," agreed Edward, standing up. "I'll leave you alone. Tomorrow we'll start preparing the documentation for the foster family program. One step at a time, Michael." After his friend's departure, Michael headed to the library where he found Becca sitting by the window, distractedly leafing through an art book. Seeing him, she immediately stood up, her anxious eyes searching for some sign on his face. "So?" she asked with a trembling voice. "Are they taking me away?" "No," replied Michael, smiling. "Not today, at least. We got a provisional authorization for you to remain here, while a more formal process proceeds." The relief on Becca's face was palpable, but soon gave way to caution. "For how long?" "Initially 30 days. After that, it will depend on the progress of the process. But I'm optimistic, Becca. There's a program called Foster Family that might be our solution." Becca nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "And my brothers?" "I talked about them to the officer." Michael took a deep breath. It was the moment of truth. "Yes," she told me. "In fact, Becca, she suggested something that I would like to discuss with you." The girl's eyes widened with a sudden understanding. "My brothers too here?" "It's a possibility," replied Michael cautiously. "A possibility that I'm seriously considering. But I would need to know how you would feel about it. And we would need to talk with Ethan and Lily too." Becca remained silent for a long moment, and Michael could almost see the gears turning in her mind, processing that unexpected idea. "They're small," she finally said. "Peter is shy at first, but then he opens up. He likes dinosaurs and anything related to space. Thomas is more extroverted, talks non-stop, loves animals. They would miss their mom like I do, but they would adapt. Children adapt." The way Becca described her brothers, with such affection and knowledge of their personalities, touched Michael deeply. "You miss them a lot," he observed softly. Becca's eyes filled with tears. "Every day. Sometimes I would go to the shelter just to see them in the yard during playtime. They didn't even know I was there, watching from a distance. So I was afraid that if they saw me, they would be sadder when I had to leave again." Michael approached and, after a moment of hesitation, placed his hand on Becca's shoulder. "We can visit them together. Get to know them. See what it would be like without promising anything yet. What do you think?" A luminous smile spread across Becca's face, completely transforming her features. "I would love that. And I know they will love meeting you too. And Ethan and Lily. They always wanted older siblings." Becca's joy was contagious, but Michael knew they needed to keep expectations realistic. "Remember, Becca, there are still many obstacles ahead. Evaluations, legal processes, adaptations. I don't want to create hopes that might be frustrated." "I know," she replied, suddenly serious. "I learned a long time ago not to count on anything until it actually happens. But just knowing that you're willing to try, it already means the world to me." In that moment, Michael knew that regardless of the challenges that would come, he had made the right decision. It wouldn't be easy, reorganizing his life to accommodate 3 more children, facing the scrutiny of the social assistance system, balancing the needs of his newly expanded family with the demands of his career. But for the first time since Amanda had left, the future seemed full of possibilities instead of empty and lonely. The following months were an emotional and bureaucratic roller coaster. There were psychological evaluations, exhaustive interviews, surprise visits from social workers, mountains of documents to fill out. Michael reduced his workload, delegating more responsibilities to his executive team, and reorganized the mansion to potentially accommodate 2 more children. Ethan and Lily met Peter and Thomas during a supervised visit to the shelter, 3 weeks after Dr. Santos's visit. The meeting, initially awkward, soon transformed into an animated play session in the yard. The expression on Becca's face as she watched her brothers interacting with Ethan and Lily was something that Michael knew he would never forget. Pure happiness mixed with cautious hope. 4 months after that rainy day when Becca had appeared at his door, Michael found himself in the office of the judge of the juvenile court, anxiously awaiting the final decision on the foster family program. Beside him were Edward, Dr. Santos, and a social worker who had accompanied the entire process. "Mr. Richardson," began the judge, a middle-aged woman with keen eyes and a serious expression, "I have read all the reports and recommendations very carefully. I must say that your situation is quite unusual." Michael felt a tightness in his chest. "Unusual in what way, Your Honor?" "It's not common to see someone in your position, a high-ranking businessman, with no previous experience in fostering, request guardianship of 3 children without biological kinship, especially when you already have 2 young children to raise alone." Edward shifted uncomfortably in his chair, preparing to intervene, but the judge continued. "However, all the psychosocial reports are extremely positive. The transformation in your family environment, the adaptation of your biological children, the evident flourishing of Rebecca during these months, all of this weighs significantly in your favor." Michael hardly dared breathe. "Furthermore," continued the judge, "the fact that you reorganized your professional life to dedicate more time to family, hired a specialized pedagogue to assist with the school transition, and demonstrated a genuine commitment to the emotional well-being of all children involved. Well, that's extraordinary." She closed the folder in front of her and looked directly at Michael. "Therefore, it is with great satisfaction that I approve your participation in the extended foster family program, granting you temporary guardianship of Rebecca, Peter, and Thomas Silver for the initial period of 1 year, renewable through periodic evaluations. At the end of this period, if everything continues progressing positively, we can discuss the possibility of permanent guardianship or even adoption, if that is the desire of all parties involved." Michael felt as if an immense weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Thank you very much, Your Honor. I don't know how to express my gratitude." The judge allowed herself a small smile. "Express it by taking good care of these children, Mr. Richardson. They deserve a family that loves and values them. And from what I see in these reports, you have already begun to build exactly that." That afternoon, Michael drove to the New Horizons shelter with Becca at his side in the passenger seat. She couldn't stop nervously playing with the ends of her hair, now better cut and cared for, but still with the same wild shine it had when he met her. "Everything's fine," assured Michael, noticing her anxiety. "They already know we're coming to get them. The social worker spoke with them yesterday." "What if they don't want to come?" asked Becca in a whisper. "What if they prefer to stay at the shelter?" Michael smiled gently. "Becca, they loved Ethan and Lily, and more importantly, they love you. Trust the process, okay?" Upon arriving at the shelter, they were greeted by a smiling staff member who led them to a small room where Peter and Thomas were waiting with their few belongings in colorful backpacks. Upon seeing Becca, the boys ran in her direction, hugging her tightly. "Are we really going to live in a real house, Becca?" asked Thomas, the youngest and most talkative of the two, his eyes shining with excitement. "With you and those nice kids?" "Yes, little one," replied Becca, her voice choked with emotion. "We're all going to live together." Peter, more reserved, looked at Michael with cautious eyes. "Are you going to be our dad now?" The question, so direct and loaded with meaning, caught Michael off guard. He knelt to be at the boy's height. I'm going to take care of you like a father, Peter. But you can still remember and love your mum. She will always be your mum, no matter what happens." The boy nodded gravely, absorbing those words. Then, to everyone's surprise, he extended his hand to Michael in a surprisingly adult gesture. "Thank you for letting us stay with Becca. She's the best sister in the world." Michael shook the small hand offered, feeling a lump in his throat. "I know that, and I'm very happy that now all of you are part of our family." The journey back home was filled with Thomas's excited questions and Peter's occasional comments. Becca patiently answered each question, explaining what the house was like, describing the rooms that had been prepared for them, promising to show them the garden where they could play. Upon arriving at the mansion in Winnetka, they found Ethan and Lily anxiously waiting at the entrance, holding a colorful sign that said, "Welcome to the family." Marina, the housekeeper, had prepared a table of snacks in the garden, with all types of treats that children love. As he watched the 5 children interacting, Ethan showing Peter his collection of toy cars, Lily and Thomas running through the garden, Becca supervising everything with a radiant smile. Michael felt a presence beside him. Not a physical presence, but an inner certainty that Amanda would be proud of this new chapter they were writing together. The mansion, which had once been just an empty and silent house, now overflowed with life and possibilities. The future would certainly bring challenges, school adaptations, past traumas to be processed, the eventual need to explain to the other children what had happened to their biology.